Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Censored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have immigrants from 19 countries barred from citizenship ceremonies, and that's a post from CH4Locks, and that's a cross post from the Blue Sky Steeds subreddit. And it looks like a Blue Sky post from Jillian Brandstetter, who Blue Skied. Officers were asking everyone what country they were from, and if they said a certain country, they were told to step out of line and that their oath ceremonies were canceled. And then she links to an article from, I guess that says that immigrants kept from Faneuil Hall citizenship ceremony as feds crack down nationwide. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for any citizenship ceremonies. I don't think citizenship should be something that the government should have control over. I think that's very much a personal thing, like as mentioned in past episodes. With that being said, ultimately, since the state has control over what constitutes citizenship, they can restrict access to it for whatever means they want to justify. And I personally think it shouldn't matter if you're a citizen or not. You should still be able to justify doing whatever you feel like, as long as you're not hurting anyone else. But in the age of the welfare state, everyone, you need to be a citizen if you want to get on welfare, and that's very much what a lot of immigrants come to the U.S. for. Despite how Reddit's like, oh, all immigrants are great, but of course, Reddit conveniently ignores that, a lot of immigrants do bring crime. They do bring, they want to get on the welfare state. And it just goes to show you that, Reddit will defend will always do whatever that will say something, and they'll just go with whatever the official narrative is, rather than actually think critically. I'm not saying there are probably some good immigrants out there, but of course Reddit, they think they're all good, except if they have an R next to their name. Like I think the governor, the Republican nominee for the governor of Virginia recently was a black immigrant woman from Jamaica, and they hated her because she has an R next to her name and goes against a lot of their narratives. But it just goes to show you, they love immigrants unless they can be put in the out group, in which case they're suddenly the worst thing ever, just like of every other category of people, I would say. Next we have 3-year-old child forced to serve as her own attorney in Tucson immigration court. In parentheses, the cruelty is a point FanCon today from coppercourier.com, posted by CH4Locks, and that's a cross post from the News of the Stupid subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't think 3-year-olds should be forced to serve as their own attorneys. But ultimately, if the state doesn't want to provide an attorney for them, sometimes that's how it goes. I guess the state they say, oh, you have to provide an attorney, but ultimately the state can justify doing whatever it feels like. And yeah, that's very much how it is a lot of the time. And yeah, you always see headlines like this on Reddit. I think that it's probably just rage bait. But that's very much all social media is at this point. It's just rage bait and AI and a lot of Indians as well, I guess. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Trump slams lack of loyalty after pardoned Democrat says he won't change party, from TheGuardian.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, are Democrats really going to vote for this bum? Republicans suck, but come on. And yeah, I personally don't think the Democrats should have changed his party if he didn't feel like it. But that being said, I definitely do think Trump has a point about lack of loyalty. He pardoned you, and you're still not going to change your party. Regardless, it just goes to show you that they're the two parties. The Democrats and Republicans are really much closer together than I think a lot of people think they are. Trump's Reddit's always like, oh, Trump's gonna arrest all Democrats and put them in jail. But Trump's pardoning a Democrat right here, and he's not even forcing him to change his party. I think that's very much goes against the Reddit narrative, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Supreme Court to hear case that could vastly expand presidential powers, from NPR.org, posted by Ninja Lover, and that's a cross post from the NPR subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think, the presidential powers are ultimately going to be whatever the president wants to justify at any moment, because the federal government ultimately has supremacy, which is the result directly the result from the Civil War. And I personally don't really care for it, But ultimately, the president can justify doing whatever the president justifies, and oftentimes there's nothing other people can do about it because the a lot of people are just going to defer to whatever the president says when it comes to the interpretation of the law, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, I recently made a post on why the nap shouldn't be just be a bumper sticker phrase. Check it out on my website from exitnow7.wordpress.com, posted by RealDraw4713, and that's a cross post from the Gold and Black subreddit. And yeah, I personally think the libertarian position is that, as long as you're not hurting anyone else or aggressing on anyone else, you should let people do whatever they want to. As long as, maybe you could argue that voluntary aggression, if someone wants someone to aggress on them, they should be able to do that. But other than that, I definitely think, the libertarian position is very much, you don't screw with me, I don't screw with you. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Trump's Department of Justice working to ban any opposition to him from commondreams.org, posted by FastDWorthiness739, and that's a cross post from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit, and they added, what type of government is it called when it will silence any type of opposition? And yeah, personally I think Common Dreams is very much a DNC propaganda outlet. So, the Democrats, when they were in power, tried to imprison Trump, but, now that Trump is in power, suddenly he's the one who wants to criminalize all opposition. It just goes to show you that, it's always going to be the same narratives regardless of which branch of the Uniparty is in power, and that's pretty much all just politics is at this point. It's a WWE style distraction from the people who are really running the show, the deep state like the CIA, FBI, NSA, and all the other alphabet agencies and military industrial complex and the like. That's very much the purpose of Trump is to distract the public with his WWE-style antics while the deep state continues to rob the people blind. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Christine Ohm claims Zoran Mamdani could be violating Constitution with advice to migrants from thehill.com, posted by Ragnar OKXG. And yeah, that's cross post from the law subreddit. Yeah, personally, I think, the Constitution should be I think freedom of speech is the number one thing, but ultimately the Constitution is really whatever people want to make it at this point. It's very much like the Bible in that people are going to use it for all their arguments, but they don't really care what's in it. The Constitution is since the ink's been dried, people, the government's really found ways to circumvent it whenever possible, while still citing it as like the Christine Ohm's doing here. It just goes to show you that people don't really care what's in the Constitution as much as they care for the authority it gives them, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have CIA torture methods documented at ICE detention facility from foreverwars.com, posted by CH4Locks, and that's a cross post from the military subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but ultimately the government can justify torturing you however it feels like, and oftentimes there's no way nothing you can do about it, since they have the legal monopoly and the use of force to justify whatever they feel like, and they control the court system as well, so you might have no recourse in addition to that. Next we have, yeah, we know, posted by Gen Z, and that's looks like a screenshot from Twitter from Austin Patchett at Ludwig Nevermises, who tweeted, "You don't have the rehabilitated Nazis to question U.S. involvement in World War II. You can just point out the Soviets were as bad, if not worse. Pretending like Hitler wasn't preparing a massive war machine undermines your case. You don't need to litigate the Holocaust to question UK and U.S. involvement in the war. It had nothing to do with the Holocaust, which we don't know was happening until after the war. We could have just let the Nazis and Soviets fight and grind each other down, instead of tipping the scales and giving the Soviets half of Europe. I told libertarians 4 years ago that they were going to undermine the anti-war case if they make rehabilitating Nazis a condition of their argument. It's even more ridiculous because it's not even necessary to make the anti-war case, and has both fractured and popularized National Socialism on the new right." And I would agree with that. The Nazis weren't libertarian, but the Soviets weren't libertarian either. I think the libertarian position is, the U.S. shouldn't have gotten involved in the war, as Padgett says here, and I would very much say that, I don't really care that the Nazis were massacring Jews and putting them in camps, but ultimately, that like for everything else, the government can justify doing whatever it wants to, and just go show you what's legal is not necessarily moral. What happened to Anne Frank and all the other Jews that were killed during the Holocaust was completely legal by the laws of the time, and it just goes to show you that you should always question law, even if it's even if you're even if someone if the group you view as the in group is currently in control of the government. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Texas launches plan to open Turning Point USA chapters in every high school from ksat.com, posted by Swamp Yankee Dan, and that's crosswords from the Not the Onion subreddit. And yeah, personally, if they wanted to justify doing that, I think they should be able to. I'm sure Reddit scores can think it's the worst thing ever, but if the state government will plan to launch after-school Satan club in every high school, Reddit will think it's the greatest thing ever because Reddit's all into that Satanist stuff. Because Satan is because all the conservatives are Christians. It's all their circle jerking. And yeah, personally, I ultimately the position is that each school should be able to have whatever clubs it wants to. If it wants to reject a club that the state forces on it, I think they should be able to. But in the case of public high schools, since they're government funded, the government run in the first place, the government can force pretty much anything on them, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, is feminism compatible with libertarianism, from Real Droll 4713, and that's crosswords from the Golden Black subreddit, and they said, I often see stuff, especially on Zitter, about feminism, but outside of Mentis Wave, I've never really seen what libertarians have to say about it. You can reply here or on my website, link in my profile. And my thoughts on that are that, if you want to be a feminist, I think that's fine, as long as you don't force your values on other people. I think the libertarian position is, you should be able to have whatever values you want to. That includes feminist values, or progressive values, or conservative values, etc., as long as you don't force those values on other people. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, She Said the Quiet Part Out Loud, linked to OG video and comments, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's a cross post from the inflation subreddit. Americans don't deserve higher wages, I guess. And that was apparently some Republican official saying, remember, the Democrats voted, and they wanted to give every single American a pay raise, every single American. And yeah, personally, I think that might sound something that's good, but it will just contribute to inflation. And ultimately, I think the libertarian position is each company should be able to pay its workers whatever it feels like it wants to justify. And we shouldn't have things like a minimum wage because ultimately the true minimum wage is zero. If you force companies to pay minimum wage, you have to hire less workers as a result. And it might force them to go bankrupt because of what it costs to pay their workers. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.